we are celebrating the final event in our 2024-2025 academic year here at Pacific School of Religion and the Center. And we are noting Juneteenth Day with today's event, Queering Juneteenth, celebrating the legacy of Black LGBTQIA+ freedom fighters with Reverend Terence Mayo, who coordinates our African American Roundtable. This event is being recorded and will be posted on our socials following the event. We will not post or publish the chat. However, we will post the discussion that follows today's event. This interactive session with Reverend Terence will delve into the stories, struggles, and triumphs of Black LGBT history makers who have shaped culture, politics, faith, and activism across generations. This workshop will also shed light on the often overlooked contributions of Black LGBT individuals for the fight for freedom and equality. Participants will be invited to explore themes of resilience, intersectionality, and the ongoing struggle for liberation in both racial and queer contexts. Let me introduce our speaker, our workshop coordinator. The Reverend Terence L. Mayo is a Black, queer, feminist, practical theologian, critical educator, and LGBTQIA+ youth advocate who strives to co-create change through contextual theological education, community-based change strategies, and racial equity. As a much sought-after speaker, Reverend Mayo has shared his expertise on various topics, including Black LGBTQIA+ youth, DEI, education community partnerships, public theology, and social change, as well as trauma-informed strategies. Terence, who serves as our coordinator for the African American Roundtable, also serves on the national boards for Progressive Youth Ministry and the Howard University School of Divinity Alumni Association. He is also a Steinhardt Fellow at New York University, working as we speak on his PhD degree in teaching and learning. He has earned degrees in business, secondary education, and religion. And so with any further comments from me, I will hand the Zoom floor over to you, Terence.
Thanks so much, Bernie. And hello all. So excited to be with you today and taking on a different type of chair for this event. Usually I'm moderating the conversations, but so glad to actually be in the speaker seat for today's discussion. And it is my hope and my goal that today we may center the voice, the experiences, and the faith of Black LGBTQIA freedom fighters, both in historical context and in our current context. And may this work help us to live freer, more joyful, and be able to live into the moment that we find ourselves in fully, in our bodies and in the collective knowing and doing as justice workers in our individual contexts. And with that in mind, I am going to share my screen to get us started. And hopefully we have a good technology day today. So welcome to our session today on Queering Juneteenth, celebrating the legacy of Black LGBTQIA+ freedom fighters, both in a historic context and also in our modern context. And so who am I? Bernie did a wonderful introduction, so I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I am privileged and honored to serve as the CLGS African American Roundtable coordinator for this leg of our work. As we are beginning to coordinate our 25-year celebration, we are excited to be wrapping up this academic year, and we won't be taking a summer off. We will be working diligently to start planning the 25th anniversary, and we are excited about what will also take place over that. And some of that work will include bringing back our National Souls of Fire conference, which, as a former fellow, I am so very excited about because that work is needed now more than ever. So, in the next couple of months, uh, be on the lookout for more information about Souls of Fire and our 25th year celebration festivities that we'll be having all of next year. So let's start to jump in and talk about what we'll be looking at what we'll be discussing today. And so we'll be grounding the conversation, thinking about, a little bit about Juneteenth, why it's important, how it was established, and what it helps us to honor and celebrate. We'll bring in intersectionality as a lens to help us to do some queering of Juneteenth. We'll talk a little bit about how this work is so important that we queer historical narratives. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll do some spotlighting of some historical figures that helps us to think about the intersections and the praxis of justice, race, gender, and sexuality. We'll also then kind of move into like contemporary connections and thinking about what's happening in our sphere today across the United States. Will always leave as the teacher in me with some practical takeaways for us to continue our learning, our doing, and our being. And then lastly, we'll have some closing and question and answer opportunities. And all of this, my hope is that we'll also use the chat to share questions, comments, concerns. You'll have the opportunity, if you like to hear your voice amongst the cloud of witnesses, you'll able to bring your voice into the conversation as well. And for those that will be joining us afterwards, thank you so much for taking time to watch the recording. We always are appreciative of those who are part of this work, even if they are not in the exact moment that we're doing the work. But we thank you for, watching the replay with us. So let's jump in a little bit. And so I love to think about this grounding question of what comes to mind when you think of Juneteenth? Mhm. What do you know about it? What words or phrases or thoughts or feelings kind of reverberate as you think about, well, what is Juneteenth? Maybe to you or to members of your community. And as people start to reflect on that, I will open us up. For me, Juneteenth is really about commemorating both Black resistance, but also Black joy. And so many times we think about the hard fought fights and the many people that played a part in it, the many roles that are a part of it, and how that is an ongoing fight, which is all very true, very absolutely true. But many times in our discussions around racial justice, we forget about joy and celebration and remembering, commemorating that as a necessary part of freedom work. So I love to lift that up. And there's some amazing comments in the chat already. So Bernie said, long delayed freedom, right? And so we'll get into how that was a little bit longer than it should have been in some aspects. Jesse says, love that resistance and Black joy. Yes, thank you for that. Absolutely, yes. And I like as I kind of said previously, like you can't have resistance without joy and celebration because they really go hand in hand and it necessitate, right, how we actually stay in the fight, right? Because we know this work is heavy and can require so much of our mind, bodies, and spirits, but it's through the renewing of our minds, as the scripture writer would say, right? That helps us to be renewed, to replenish as we do this work. And so that joy, that celebration, that renewal is just as integral as actual doing some of the work that is required for freedom. So thank you all for so much of those. So, what is Juneteenth? This could be a 6 hour mini course all by itself. But just to kind of quickly highlight some important elements of this. So Juneteenth is about honoring freedom, resilience, and Black joy, like we already talked about before. It's both an annual holiday that commemorates the end of slavery in the United States. It is observed on June 19th. So it is a combination of the words June and 19th. And so there's the African American vernacular English there, also called Juneteenth, and has been celebrated since 1866, and is considered one of the oldest continuing African American holidays. And even before the federal government agreed it was a holiday, we as Black people said it's our holiday. And so it has been a continuous mark in the time of Black freedom, resilience, and Black joy. It's also known by a couple of different names, depending on what part of the country you find yourself in. It's also known as Black Independence Day, Emancipation Day, Jubilee. We love a good Jubilee Day. Juneteenth Independence Day, and Juneteenth National Independence Day. And so in June of 1865, the Union soldiers actually arrived in Galveston, Texas, to announce their emancipation to African Americans in Galveston. So this was 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, which is an important thing to note because when we think about the long fight of freedom, right? Freedom also was enacted in different parts of the country at different times. And so, marking that the Union soldiers arriving in Galveston, Texas, to announce the actual freedom of African Americans is a distinct point in how we think about the history of freedom and also how freedom, even from a national standpoint, looks different in different localities. So, marking that this particular time of freedom happened 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation is an important marker for us to remember as we think about the historical work. So the following year was the actual first official Juneteenth celebration, which took place in Texas. The original observance included prayer meetings, the singing of spirituals, and the celebrants wore new clothes as a way of representing their newfound freedom. And so, even then, in the historical ways of celebrating and embodying freedom, there was always this deep connection to spirituality. And so, in those spaces, they were a point of celebrating, honoring, commemorating both the act of freeing the freedom and the embodiment of freedom, both in a spiritual, practical, and a justice sense, which is always so important to note. Because sometimes people forget the linkages to Black faith and Black justice. And so, noting that the celebration always had spiritual elements to it is a key reminder to as we think about this celebration and commemoration. So, within a few years after the launching of the first Juneteenth celebrations, we again to see through Black travel and Black relocation that the story and the commemoration of Juneteenth began to spread throughout the United States. And so we then began to see Juneteenth celebrations popping up all across different states. And the celebrations have continued since then, again, in many different ways and fashions, but always including some type of prayer and religious service, speeches, parades, educational events, family gatherings, picnics, festivals, music, dancing. So celebration and joy has always been a part of that. Again, not just as this anchoring justice based thing, but also as a way of remembering our humanity, our bodies, our communities, and of being together. And the celebrations also included not only spirituals, but the performing and the reciting of Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is, some would say, the unofficial African American national anthem, but I really think it's official at this point. And so, between the performances of the spiritual and the dancing, and the reciting of Lift Every Voice and speeches about freedom, we it really encompasses this holistic, beautiful tapestry of the myriad of ways that Black bodies and Black souls show up in freedom and what that freedom feels and looks like. And so Juneteenth has always been about, again, freedom, resilience, and celebration, and remembering the past and bringing it towards the present and pointing us towards the future. And since then, Juneteenth has evolved in many different ways across the country and takes on many different forms. And then in 2021, it officially became a national federal holiday in the United States. So that's just a little bit about the history of Juneteenth and how those foundational elements still resonate through the celebrations across the United States. Now, I would love for us to complicate the language of freedom just a little bit, to think through how we bring in the experiences, the work, the bodies, the spirits of our Black, queer, and trans siblings into this work. And so, to help us kind of do some of that, um, one tool that I love to use is called intersectionality. And intersectionality was coined by the legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 to describe the ways in which different forms of social inequality and oppression overlap and interact to create unique experiences of discrimination and oppression. And so when we think about social inequality and how that interacts with our bodies, our communities, and ourselves, one way that Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw helps us to think through this through intersectionality is to think through our social identities. So, thinking through our race, our gender, our class, our sexuality, and how that creates specific times when oppressive systems shows up and constricts, oppresses, and creates inequality. And so for Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, she used intersectionality as a tool to bring light to the specifically the way Black women were oppressed through legal systems. And now that work has been used in many different forms now in many different fields as well to again to highlight how individuals and communities are oppressed by systems. So it's not just about social identities, it's about how social identities are oppressed by systems. So that's a key point. It's also about how do we think about the complex experiences of oppression, right? And so some of that is acknowledging that oppression looks, feels, and is embodied differently depending on the different social identities that we have and can create unique, complex scenarios. And so, again, Dr. Crenshaw lifted up the plight of Black women. But again, we can also think about specifically for our context of how Black LGBTQIA individuals and communities are then oppressed in very specific ways. And one of those ways is when they are not included in our histories. Dr. Crenshaw also talks about how this work talks about overlapping identities. And so that is, yes, for me, using an I statement, yes, I am Black. I am also a cis male. I am also queer. I am also a first generation college graduate. I am also lower middle class, right? Those are some of the identities that I hold. And so systems oppress me in different ways because of our identity, my identities. And likewise, we all have various identities and they overlap and come against systems in different ways. And so intersectionality helps us to kind of name some of that. And lastly, we cannot only talk about the oppression, but we must also talk about and use asset based language. And so intersectionality helps us to think about how do we name oppression, but also how do we name the ways of empowerment and resistance to oppression. And again, so centrally important that we, yes, name the things that have been done to us, but also don't forget what we are able to move through and conquer and get freedom from as part of this work of naming and understanding oppression. Intersection also, again, helps us to make the invisible visible. And so, for this conversation today, it helps us to make visible Black LGBTQ plus freedom fighters of yesterday and today. Because what we know is in many of our stories and recounting of historical narratives, many times Black LGBTQ folk are actual specifically excluded or unintentionally excluded. One specific name that is talked about when we think about invisibility and visibility would be Bayard Rustin, right? Of how he was purposely ignored, maligned, put to the side, and then made invisible in historical context because he was a Black same gender loving man. And how many times many people will tell the story of the work of MLK Jr. And the work that he did, but forget to talk about how Bayard Rustin was actually standing side by side with him in that work. And so intersectionality helps us to, again, bring Bayard into the conversation, to say his name, to invoke the ancestor, and to make him visible when historical accounts would not only make him invisible, but many of our other Black LGBTQ freedom writers of the past and of the present. So I'd love to stop there and pause to see what's coming up for you when you think about intersectionality, think about oppressed parts of our culture and our communities, and thinking about how do we make the invisible visible in our work. And feel free to put your reflections in the chat. And if you'd like to come off of mute, you can just raise your hand and we'd love to hear your voice as well.
Okay.
Kathleen, yes.
Yes, well, I'm very glad to be here and learn more about this pivotal celebration in Black life. And must admit that I knew about Juneteenth, but I didn't really know that much about it. So it's not celebrated in my culture. And maybe I see Lewis here. It's funny because I was thinking when I turned in, I said I should call Lewis. He should be here, and there he appeared. So we're developed. We have a friendship. So it was kind of like, okay, of course he would appear. There are other people that could appear as well. I'm interested in, I was doing my intersectionality, which would be white, woman, student, um, educated, very educated, several degrees, and queer. And the queer really has made me feel more oppressed. And I feel oppressed in my school and at PSR. I'm definitely oppressed. I just went through a boundary situation with my dean
Mm,
for reasons that only she had the power to define the situation, and it makes me sort of angry, but it also helps me identify with other oppressions and other oppressed people. So I don't feel alone in this. I just feel that, yeah, it goes on.
mm,
And I've always felt I'm also doing a lot of writing biography now because I'm applying for a CPE program. As a girl coming up, I was told I couldn't go to medical school. I was,
mm,
unless I got all A's. Well, I got all A's in high school, but that didn't help particularly. I mean, I came up through that feminine, no women in science period, and then I think of blacks and the tremendous, horrible discrimination black bodies have experienced, and I can't even. I wrote it. I had to write an essay on this in the liberation class I'm taking, and it's like I can't even imagine it. It's like so unimaginable because it's so much worse than I could imagine. So
mm,
these are the things that come up as we have this discussion and it's still very much, I think, a present, is God's present, um, LGBTQ plus present discrimination is also with us.
mhm,
Um, and of course, racisms of all kind, and this is being demonstrated in Los Angeles right now, right? With the call of the National Guard. All that is a color, it's a color issue with Trump. So we've got it all around us, and we can celebrate together and be resilient and be defiant. It's Yeah.
mhm.
So anyway, that's my comment. Those are my comments. I can stop talking. Um, I would be interested, sort of a gathering of the oppressed.
Mhm,
I can laugh about it too, because it's kind of like disaffiliation. It's kind of nice to feel that.
mhm, mhm. And first and foremost, thank you so much for your bravery in naming yourself and bringing your social identities and yourself into the conversation. And also, like, I loved also like your comment about like if we think about right the ways we are oppressed and in the best sense of how we might use right the collective work of Jesus, right? How it might lead us to think about, right? If I am oppressed and I feel this in my soul and in my body, how might this help me to see my neighbor a little bit better and have grace for them and to think about them as well and to then create, right, the mighty cloud of witnesses that we actually need to move the work forward. And so that is the work of the social justice community organizer, Jesus, right? Helping us to connect to each other because in that connection, social justice organizers, community organizers will tell you, right? It is through that storytelling. That's a whole nother workshop by itself. But is it in the storytelling that helps us to see each other and also to help us to create the coalitions, which gives us the people power that we actually need to move oppressive systems out of our neighborhoods, out of our communities, and do the work that our siblings in LA are doing and showing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Reverend Ann, I see your hand.
Uh, hmm. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for this presentation. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the both the intersectionality approach and the whole concept of how we make visible the invisible. Sessions like this are one way, are definitely a strategy for making visible. I think particularly in this time where there's so much intentionality about erasing our history and our identities, that we have to be strategic, and I would even say aggressive, in researching our own history and making sure that in whatever our community settings are, our school settings, that we bring forth the stories, as you were talking about storytelling, that are not always on the surface. You know, I grew up in Missouri, and I may have heard my parents mention Juneteenth, but I didn't really learn about that, and certainly it wasn't a part of our social studies curriculum, so to speak, you know. So being able to, every time we learn about something, it gives us an opportunity to tell someone else, and especially to teach it to our children, so that they are not just unmoored in the world, not really understanding who they are. With respect to the intersectionality point, which is also very important, not only understanding the intersectionality of our oppressions, understanding the intersectionality of the ways in which we are empowered, but also understanding the ways in which our the intersectionality of our privileges, because sometimes we can inadvertently become a part of the systems of oppression without understanding some of the privileges of our own identity. All of us here in theological education are experiencing a privilege that's not accessible to all. And so for me, yeah, it's three-dimensional. What are my identities? What are my where I experience both oppression and privilege, and manifest privilege. You know, do I always speak first in a context? You know, that's my way of being. How do I, you know, how do I do that? So it's oppressions, identities, and empowerments. You know, what are those identities? What comes from my grandmother that gives me the strength to move forward, as well as my privileges? So thank you very, very much for this presentation. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too, and thank you for that. Yeah, and so I'll kind of quickly highlight two things. I love that you said. So one, I thank you for bringing in the privilege piece as part of that, right? Because that's a necessary part. And I also like kind of remind people, you know, part of what we have seen in the recent landscape is that. Um, there has been co-opting of language and meaning by our right-leaning neighbors. And part of that co-opting of language and meaning, why it is so dangerous, is one, it further oppresses oppressed communities, and two, it actually helps to stop and actually push against actual communal learning, knowing, and being. And so one of the dangers of this was we saw of privilege being cast as this this marker of white fragility where people were not willing to kind of understand their privilege because that meant them owning some of their social identities. And so some of my invitation to people is to actually realize that actual privilege in itself is a word that does not have to have a negative connotation to it, right? It is a word that will actually allow us to also think about the complexity of our social identities. Two, to understand the complexity of how our identities show up in different spaces, and that if we don't understand the ways we are privileged in different spaces, we actually can't be good allies or co-conspirators. So it's a necessary part of the work. And so some of the work, revolves us kind of taking back the word privilege so we can actually sit with it and understand that we all have it, right? And we all have to kind of hold that. And then very quickly, too, I love what you're saying as well about the learning piece of that. Because very quickly, I was speaking with a ecclesial body last week, and one of the things that I offered to them as like a natural next step to their work was what would it look like if each congregation had their own banned booked library? What would it look like if each congregation had their own banned booked library that lifted up the voices of authors who many times for the banned books were people of color and or LGBTQ people. And so what would it look like to lift up their narratives and their books to ensure that our communities actually learned their stories and we removed the barrier for those stories being more widely known? And I see a couple of hands, and so I'm gonna try to go down the list. Correct. Bernie, I saw your hand.
Louis, do you want to go before me? Go ahead, please. I've talked a lot. I'll go after you if I'm.
Hi, folks. So I'm having a lot of different feelings right now. I love this. I love this conversation. And I was thinking about some of the things that Pastor Ann just said. And then I'm also thinking about what can we say to celebrate? I feel that sometimes these conversations are always about what's wrong, what's not working, that we are oppressed, that we are beat upon. And I get weary. I get so weary because I want to talk about, while we're talking about this, what to be celebrated. We've made some amazing strides. I look at City of Refuge and the work that we do at City of Refuge for our trans community, for our LGBT community, for women that we've been doing for 30 years. You know, Pastor Ann and I had the opportunity this weekend to open up the LGBT Center East in East Oakland, right? A whole new space for people of color to work and to be in community together. And I want to celebrate as much as I want to talk about the troubles we've seen. When I think of Baylor, and thank you for bringing up that brother, as a powerful brother. I think about his exclusion, but I also think about the exclusion of women in the movement and how many women were played pivotal roles that have never been lifted up in the movement. But yet I also want to celebrate where we have come. You know, I'm an AIDS generation. I grew up burying people, 200 funerals between 1982 and 2002, right? Everybody in my generation, male figures and some women I know died. And so I want to add to this conversation things to celebrate that we have, where we've come. And I know there's a lot of work to do. And I think it's partly is that I'm so beaten down with Trump and I don't think I can say that word on the screen, and what he's doing to our nation and what have you. And I don't want to give in to despair and to anger and to fear. You know, I want to celebrate the great things about intersectionality and where things have and how we've come together as people, marginalized people who have found each other, and how it's so incredible that we continue to move together as marginalized people to address the crap that we're dealing with. And so I'm feeling this weight of this conversation about, oh, here we go, here we are again talking about queer, the problems and and what's bad and how we're being put upon. And I want to celebrate our greatness as a people, our greatness as queer folks, our greatness as Black people, and finding the intersectionality where we have hope and we have, and we have love for each other and love for ourselves. And so I just needed to add that to this conversation so I could stay with it.
No, thank you for bringing that into the conversation. That's important, right? Because it has to be the both and not the either or. Mhm.
Yeah.
I saw your hand.
Tanya, did you want to go?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear that. You broke up, so that's why I didn't hear that. I'm lucky. Lucky, I guess, is the word. I'm actually from Texas, and so I have been celebrating Juneteenth all my life because um, that's something that's been a part of my culture. Being a Texan and from South Texas, not far from not far from Galveston, right outside of Houston, about an hour and a half away from Houston. So that's something that's been a part of me for my entirety. And so it was really strange for me to realize that not everyone knows about this and not everyone celebrates this or understands that. And so for us, July 4th was just another day, whereas Juneteenth was our celebration, our freedom celebration, in a sense of really, barbecues and all the good that goes along with that. So thank you for highlighting that. Again, me being naive in my youth, not knowing that this was much less broad, except for in Texas. So that's one of the pieces of it. But now, as an adult, I actually live in the DC area, right outside of Washington, DC. And so, yay! So I just finished with World Pride this past weekend. And so I agree with Mr. Knox or Brother Knox in a sense of saying we have to celebrate the good, because after walking through World Pride and marching and really kind of being a part of that community, the hope came back because I live with that person not far from me making all these legislations and rules about a community that he knows nothing about, or a bunch of communities that he knows nothing about, and has always sat in that ivory tower of money. And so he doesn't understand the intersectionality of not just the people that look like him, but also the people who don't look like him, and how his legislation is really kind of faulting them. But when I walked out of World Pride, I walked out with the sense of, no, you can make all those rules, but we're not changing. We're not going back. We're not going back into the closet. You can just, they said more choice words than I'm saying here, but really they stood up and said, no, this is not who we are. We are this group of people. And so it gave me hope that not just in my neck of the woods where we are constantly fighting, that all of the world is fighting to make sure that inclusion is a part of the equation. And so there's hope. And there's lots of hope and joy that walked out of that, and especially a lot of Black joy, because DC is a predominantly Black city, even though most people don't realize that. And so that to see that Black joy in action and in movement, it was really wonderful, because not just people who didn't look like me were out celebrating, but lots of people who look like me in my African American skin were part of that. And so there is hope, and there is joy that's happening. And I think that it's one of those things of despair is the way that we actually kind of get things done sometimes, and we forget to, as Brother Knox said, celebrate that joy, and who we are and where we are. And yeah, we got a lot of work to do, but we've come so far. So thank you for doing this.
Thank you, Latanya. I think Reverend Terence has dropped out, Terence, are you there? Carlos, did you have your hand up? Did you want to go ahead, please? We can't hear you, I don't think. But you're not muted. Okay, here comes Terence. Saved the day. Carlos, we can't hear you. I don't know if you want to put your comments in the chat. I'm sorry, we don't have audio for you. Welcome back, Terence.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's not your fault.
No, my Wi-Fi just went out. Thank God for a personal hotspot.
Carlos was going to say something after Latanya, but we don't have audio for Carlos, so I invited Carlos to put it in the chat. And I think they just did. Oh, I see.
Oh, so everyone's having technology issues today. No worries. Okay, let me reshare my screen.
Hello, can you hear me, guys?
Yes, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for this conversation. I really enjoy this. We were talking about intersectionality, and for me, just talking about this topic, it's a celebration itself. Why? Well, Latanya was sharing something related to living in Texas, and she does. She said she didn't hear people about talking about this conversation that much. And intersectionality for me makes me think about my privileged self and my unprivileged self so much. What are the advantages I have just for being here? Number one, I'm from Nicaragua. I'm a person of color, and we haven't had this kind of conversation at all in my country. So if we are talking about specifically Black people from my country, I haven't heard that much about how, they how can I say, they identify themselves, and how they talk about, all those different characteristics about themselves. So I think it's just a celebration talking about this conversation. And I think it's very important, not just talking about here, because the Black community in everywhere in the world has suffered so much. They have been like in many different oppression systems. And especially right now in my country, where we are living under a very how can I say, strong regime where you cannot talk about different problems with the government. If you do that, you can be in jail, just and accused for being, not for being, you can be accused for terrorism if you talk about against the government. And that's a big issue we are going through there. And I'm really, that's why I think I'm a privileged person, because I'm being here. And I'm glad you have that, this conversation that is becoming a national, it's already a holiday. But what about the queer historical narratives in people, not just from the United States, but what about the other Black community in other places that they don't have these conversations? What about those traditional stories or experiences that they are not allowed to share? So that's what I think. I'm glad that we're having this conversation. And just having this conversation, for me, it's a celebration. Just having these voices, making these voices visible, as Mr. Terence was saying, that is a celebration. And I'm glad that it's true that there is so much struggle, and we are so tired to talk about struggle. That's why we need to talk about celebrations as well. But sometimes it's very important to keep in mind, to remember, to give voices to those voices that we don't hear. And I'm glad that we were talking about Black hope and Black joy. And I think that's something I heard, I think, from Miss Terence, or I'm sorry, just kind of thinking about names. I'm sorry, from Miss Latanya. That's what I was saying. There are so many voices there that they are not heard, and just giving them visibility, that's a big celebration. That's what I wanted to say. I'm sorry if I wasn't clear myself.
No, that is wonderful and beautiful, and also a reminder, right? That sometimes even just sharing our social identities is a means of celebration, because some of us still today in some of the communities that we live in or serve in can't be honest about the totality of who we are. So that's a great reminder. Yeah, and reminding us, Lewis reminding us that, we gotta remember the joy, the celebration, and the commemoration. I love that as well. And Latanya, talking about her experience as well. And although I didn't grow up celebrating Juneteenth, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, which is a very interesting place. We don't have time for that conversation today. But I did grow up with Black teachers that taught me the works of Black writers and authors, such as, if you haven't read Frederick Douglass's um, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." Ooh, ooh. Now, he was not queer, but that girl she gave a scathing speech, basically highlighting, right, that why should African Americans ever celebrate the 4th of July, right? That makes no sense to us, because we were never free on during the 4th of July, and and that day was never a date of freedom for us. And so I wanted to lift that up, but and also kind of move us forward so we can get through the rest of this. But he queered Independence Day, absolutely. Um, so moving us forward, so I can be good steward of our time. But thank you all so much for this robust conversation. I really appreciate it. And so, as we think about querying historical narratives, and even just my exercise just now of thinking how, like, Frederick Douglass, like, queered, right, the 4th of July, right? Querying historical narratives helps to challenge erasure of queer identities and mainstream historical accounts, helps us to live into the full divinity of the human diversity and contributions. I already lifted up the amazing work of Bayard Rustin. We also, can't leave this virtual space without honoring the amazing legacy of the ancestor Marsha P. Johnson, who was a central key person in the Stonewall Uprising, which again underscores living in her truth as a Black trans woman, and starting the first Pride celebration with the actual throwing of a brick. It is the amazing work. So we must lift up her name. And it also helps us to then lean into how we queer Juneteenth and how we queer the work of Black freedom and liberation and joy. And there are so many amazing figures that, again, we would be here for hours trying to name all the names of the ancestors and the elders who have done so much amazing work. Those that are still with us on this plane of existence, and those that have gone on before us. But just quickly to name some who people might not know, there's also the amazing Pauli Murray, who was civil rights lawyer, an activist, a priest, and just an amazing public thinker. They were did so many things in the praxis of not only their social identity but in their work. And so when you think about some of the early civil rights legislation, right, many times they forget to name Pauli's name. But when you go back and look, many of those legislative moves and gestures and language could not have been without Pauli Murray's beautiful, brilliant mind. And then with Pauli Murray, you have to talk about Stormy. I'm gonna mess up her name so bad. De La Verde, who was an amazing performer, activist, and as some would call her, the Rosa Parks of the gay community. Again, seminal figure at the Stonewall protest, and also was an amazing embodied performer who embodied cross-dressing in the most beautiful ways. So was one part performer, one part activist, and just all around, I had to watch my language, amazing person, because I wanted to say something else. And then you have Essex Hemphill, who I absolutely love as one of my people that I look up to as a writing ancestor. And many people don't know of the huge contributions of Essex when it comes to writing, poetry, documentary work, and activism. And lastly, but not least, my amazing ancestor, Ibrahim Farajage, who I was introduced to when I was an MDiv student at Howard University. He is a former faculty member of Howard. And as I was in my second year of my MDiv program, and one of my professors was like, you remind me of somebody, and I don't know who it was. Actually, it was my New Testament professor. And halfway through the New Testament class, he was like, "Hey, come into my office." I was like, "Sure." And we started talking. He was like, "I know exactly who you are." And I was just like, "I'm glad you do, because I don't." Because at the time, I was still trying to reconcile my sexuality with my faith, things like that. He was like, "You are a modern day Ibrahim." And I was just like, "Who's that?" And he was like, and so he told me all the beautiful stories of how Ibrahim was amazing theologian and also just an embodied radical AIDS activist, and brought gender and sexuality into theological spaces in ways that did not conform to status quo and nice ways of being and doing, and took people to task for the limits of their theological language. I was like, "Oh yeah, that's my ancestor. That's my ancestor." And so I would be remiss if I did not bring forth my ancestor Ibrahim Farajji to this conversation. And so again, quick highlights of some of the amazing activists, organizers, brilliant minds who have embodied both the joys, the passion, and the struggle of Black, queer, and trans liberation throughout our country. Now, we had some robust conversations, so I won't take too much time on this, but I love to see if maybe there was a name or two that you've this is your first time hearing about, and or someone you know, and have heard about their work before. Again, we talked really briefly about Bayard Rustin, Marsha P. Johnson, Pauli Murray, Essex Hempfield, Ibrahim Farajage, Stormy. Um, Speaking their name, seeing their likeness, does that invoke anything in you? Are they new figures for you?
I just want to say briefly, so Ibrahim was one of the strongest supporters of the center, CLGS, when it was founded at GTU 25 years ago, and was one of our very first recipients of our Leading Voice Award. So Ibrahim was right there in our corner when there were many at the GTU who did not want to see the center happen, but he was right there.
Hmm. Thank you for that, Bernie. I did not know that. Reverend Ann says Stormy is new to her, and she also lifts up the name of Marlon Riggs. Yes, love Marlon. Marlon was an amazing documentarian who really, with Essex, did some amazing storytelling about the Black gay male experience in America, and was I have some ideas for a project around him, but I'll just stop there. Carlos said these are new people, so glad to we're lifting up some new people. What, Lewis? Oh, I'm so jealous. So Lewis says Essex and Marlon were both personal friends of his in South and SA in the 80s. Oh, so jealous. So jealous. Yes, Lewis, I see your hand.
So both of those guys were amazing people, along with, folks like Glenn Burke, who's been named at the LGBT Center. Glenn was was the first Black player, gay player that came out in baseball. He played with both the Dodgers and the Oakland A's. And as some of you may know, he is credited with being the founder of the high five. So if you look up the high five in Wikipedia, Glenn Burke's name will come out. It happened a game that were being played at the Dodger Stadium where someone hit an amazing run or did a certain, and he just went up to one of his classmates and he hit the high five, and that became a thing. And now it's used all over the world, right? So that came from a gay Black brother, Glenn Burke. But Marlon and Essex were people very much in the community that I grew up with when I came to San Francisco. I love both of those brothers. You should definitely check out their work. It's amazing. And a word about Pauli Murray. I happen to be a real big fan of Pauli Murray. In fact, I keep quarters of Pauli Murphy. She's now on the quarter. So get some quarters that have Pauli Murphy on the back. Here's a little known story about Pauli Murray. Pauli Murray was the first Black woman in Howard Law School. She came there at a time where no one would speak to her. Now get that. A Black law school, all men, no one will speak to the only woman in the class. She wrote a paper that said, here's how we get rid of segregation in the courts. She was laughed at. Her paper was put aside and they said she was out of her mind. When Roe v. Wade came up, when I'm getting old, so my words don't come as fast. When the Board of Education trial came up, they went back to find her paper. They used the arguments that she articulated in her paper before the Supreme Court and the Board of Education, and it was her argument that won the court, that made that case. And it was only recently that they ever even mentioned that she was the progenitor of that argument that was the successful in the Board of Education case. And when you see Langston Hughes and all, not Langston, when you see the court and all of the people who did that court, there's three guys that are there getting credit, right? She never got credit. That it was her argument that won the day. She is a phenomenal woman. Yale has just opened up the Pauli Murray Center. They built a whole center around her, and they were the people who rejected her.
Mm-hmm.
So I recommend reading her autobiography. There's a movie on Amazon about her. She was a phenomenal woman. And I'm so grateful that she is finally getting her due, because while she was alive, she did not. So it's a phenomenal story. So I recommend it to everybody.
Yes, I definitely recommend her documentary on Amazon. It's
Her book, her
and
autobiography. Read it. It's an unbelievable read.
mm-hmm. It's beautiful work. And to your point, yeah, Thurgood, I love my alpha brother. He did some amazing did some amazing work.
Yeah, he did.
But we can also be critical about where our elders, ancestors did not meet the moment. And one of the ways he did not meet the moment, which was honoring Pauli Murray, because, like you said, central to his argument
Right.
was Pauli Murray's words.
That's right. It made the court. It was the one that resonated with the justices, and they overturned segregation based on her argument. Yeah, powerful story.
Thank you.
This is so good.
I'm
And
glad.
definitely check out the work of Essex and Marlon. You will be amazed. Yeah, those were great brothers. I miss them and think about them often. Yeah.
Louis, do you have the title of that book? Carlos is wondering.
For Murray?
Yeah.
Yes. Hold on. Let me get my phone, because yes. Hold on. Give me one
If
second.
you can put it in the chat when you
I'll
have
put
a
it in the
chance.
chat right now.
Thank
Okay, so I'm gonna be good. I'll let Louis do that, and while he's doing it, I'm gonna move to the next one so we can be good stewards of our time, because we're coming up to the end.
Oh no.
Oh, thank you, Kathleen. Pauli Murray, long in a weary throat. Sorry.
Yes, that's it.
Thank you, Kathleen. So we talked about how intersectionality helps us to bring through, right, and make visible our ancestors and our elders in this work. And so I now want to move into thinking about, like, how do we also bring into, like, this current context of not only the work, but the celebrations, the joy, and how this is a continuous movement that is happening. And so there are definitely some amazing organizations and entities that are living into the work that was started, and they're continuing. And I mentioned some of them here. And my goal specifically in all of this work, but really this slide specifically, is that you will think through, like, what are some of the ancestors that you don't know, and just take a moment to go look them up, learn more about them. Similar to these modern contemporary connections, think through who are some of these organizations that you know or you don't know, and learn more a little bit about their work. And so very quickly, there is the National Black Justice Coalition. And so this organization supports the Black community at the intersections of racial justice and LGBTQ equity. Does some amazing work. Then you have BYP 100, which is also Black Youth Project 100. So this is actually a young adult national membership-based organization that's specifically for those 18 to 35. So yes, our young people need a space of their own as well. And they do amazing work around justice and freedom for Black people. Many of their founders were self-identified as Black LGBTQ folk. Then you have Brave Space Alliance, which is one of the first Black and trans-led LGBTQ centers in the Chicago area. They do amazing work around health, housing, food, and dignity for Black trans people in the Chicago area. Then you have the Movement for Black Lives. And while they do not specifically focus on the Black LGBTQ experience, they do, again, many of their founders are Black LGBTQ young adults. Then you have the Marsha P. Johnson Institute, which honors the Black trans activist Marsha P. Johnson herself and does work again around supporting and fighting for the rights of Black trans people. And then the Audre Lorde Project, which is a Brooklyn-based organization here that does radical work around nonviolent activism in the city, specifically for Black LGBTQ people. Then there's the Center for Black Equity, which is an international organization which tries to bring together Black LGBTQ leaders and organizers from around the world to look at and fight for Black LGBTQ social equality, health equality, and economic equality. And the Lighthouse Foundation, which is also another Black LGBTQ-led social justice organization that fights for Black LGBTQ Chicagoans. And so the work continues. It has multi layers from international to national based. And again, some of these organizations are specifically about LGBTQ inclusion and equity, and others are founded and or run by those who identify as Black LGBTQ. And of course, I would be remiss if I wouldn't talk about CLGS as part of an amazing cadre of people who have been fighting for the equity and inclusion of Black LGBTQ people. So just a couple of names, just a couple of names. I'd love for you also to share in the chat or verbally, like a current Black LGBTQA activist or organization that you admire, and kind of why. Yes, Dr. Pamela Lightsey. Yes, we definitely lift up her name. She is one of my mentors that has to deal with me, so keep her in prayer. Yes, we love Lightsey's work. Thank you, Kathleen. Appreciate that. Bishop Yvette Flunder. Yes. Our bishop. Yes. Yes. Professor Jahari Jabir. Wonderful. Absolutely. I will we haven't even talked about this, Bernie, but he will be with me in August.
Oh, yay, yay, yay.
Amazing. So thank you for lifting up those names. and bringing them into this space as well. So I, again, would not be a good educator if I did not leave us with things to consider for our next steps. And how do we make the support um, practical as we think about continuing to build on the work of Black, queer, and trans freedom fighting, equity, inclusion, as we do this work. Part of this is making this tangible in ways what we can, like I like to say, you can't eat an elephant in one bite, right? And so many times people will say, "Hey, all of this is great. I just don't know where to start." And so hopefully some of these tips will give us ideas of things of where we can start, where we can find ourselves in the work, and to help hopefully make sure not only are you aware of some of the amazing organizations and people doing this work, but also like how you find yourselves, right, in this work. Because what we know is it takes all of us to move the work forward, right? And so all of us can't do all the things, but hopefully in some of these options, you will be able to find that one thing that you can leave this space and do. So that might mean donating to Black LGBTQI led organizations, as we know, um, with federal funding and also state funding drying up for many social, racial justice organizations. Now more than ever, these organizations need our support financially. So, thinking through ways you as an individual, your organization, your institution, your congregation can support these organizations financially can go a long way to continue the work. Also, using our social media to amplify their work, right? Many times, because of how the algorithms work in social media, many of us may only see particular things on our social media. And so sometimes to break the algorithm, we need to amplify the work of others. And so share some of the organizations, the people, the names, the historical figures we've lifted up today. Share their books, share their documentaries, share their names so those that are in your social media community can again start to learn more about them. Definitely attend and support events. We are so thankful that you spent a little time with us today. So thank you for your support for this event. Continue to participate in panels, marches, virtual events that center the voices and the work of Black LGBTQ people. It means a lot when people show up. Continue to educate yourself and others about the work of Black LGBTQ individuals and freedom fighters and communities. Again, reading books, watching documentaries, and also sharing them with others about what you are learning and who you're learning about. Also, continue to advocate for inclusive policies. Now more than ever, we need people bravely speaking up and doing the work to actually dislodge oppression in our organizations and doing the work to create brave spaces for celebration and joy. Continue to be an ally, a co-conspirator, a social justice worker in your own right to create affirming spaces in schools and workplaces, congregations, where we can prioritize Black LGBTQ experiences, Black queer and trans joy, and Black queer and trans well being. And then lastly, support mutual aid and bail funds now more than ever. If you follow me on social media, you will always hear me saying we keep each other safe. And so, just as a as a reminder, when you see we need grassroots mutual aid more than ever. And so it's great to be locked into national organizations, and I won't discount their work because their work is super important. And grassroots local work is more important than ever. And many times, grassroots local organizations don't get the same amount of funding that national organizations do. And so, if you can find a local or regional organization that you want to support, um, get information about their mutual aid and how you can support their mutual aid because so that's so important. Also, how you can support bail funds. And for those that don't know, for those of us that get locked up a lot for doing social justice work, bails can become quite healthy. In my former life, doing social work, people will discount actually how much money it costs when we would get locked up. And so, for those that are directly impacted who want to do racial and social justice work, we want to have bail funds because bail funds allow communities to support people, to continue to speak out for what the work that they're doing, but financially are able to get them out of jail a little bit quicker. So, support local bail funds when you see them arise. And lastly, kind of like I said before, continue to share and be in intentional relationships with people. Now more than ever, we need to find ways to have storytelling events or just relational spaces where we're building relationships, we're figuring out how we can capitalize on each other's privileges to do this work that takes all of us. So, how do we move past being transactional and how do we move into deep, deep, rich relationship? Because that's what we need now more than ever. And so, again, don't try to do everything, don't get overwhelmed. Find that one thing that you want to leave today's sessions with and go do that. So think about that one thing and then go do that. And again, I wouldn't be an educator if I didn't give you some resources. We've already lifted up some names of some amazing books and documentaries, but I want to lift up some other things that might be helpful to your learning and your growth. So, one, Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, who's also another amazing Black queer woman who was an amazing writer, author, activist. Sister Outside is a seminal text if you're thinking about the praxis of race, gender, sexuality, and what that means in American context. You also have C. Riley Snorton, is an amazing scholar whose book Black on Both Sides looks at the racial history of the trans identity. And so in it, Dr. Snorton kind of creates a beautiful map of bringing the invisible visible about the Black trans experience in America. Then it's one of my amazing contemporaries, Darnell Moore, who has spoken at CLGS in the past, whose book, his first text, No Ashes in the Fire, coming of age of Black and free in America is a wonderful story of his own self growing up Black and queer. Then there's Marlon Riggs' classic documentary Tongues Untied, which again talks about the Black gay man experience. And so, amazing documentary. little harder to find, but what I found is most of the public libraries have access to it through their catalogs. Then another black queer, and from my taste, authors and activists that does not get enough visibility and praise is June Jordan. Love her, love her. An amazing poet, writer, activist who also helps us to think about Blackness globally and to think about as a diaspora, what does that mean for African people? And does amazing work connecting Blackness to gender and sexuality and to the Palestinian fight for freedom. Next, another great contemporary, George M. Johnson, whose first book, All Boys Aren't Blue. Wonderful, again, frat brother of Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. His seminal text is actually the most banned book in America. The most banned book in America. And this memoir tells the story of him growing up black and a black queer young boy in America. Amazing, amazing book. Another one of my dear ancestors, and I call myself hashtag a Baldwinite, is James Baldwin's Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is an amazing story about growing up as a black gay man in the African American church. Um, Another seminal figure, Dr. Angela Davis' work, Freedom is a Constant Struggle. In it, she links the Ferguson Uprising to Palestine to racial justice movements across the globe. Amazing, amazing text. Another text, this one from Essex Hempfield, called Brother to Brother, New Writings by Black Gay Men. Seminal texts in Black gay male studies, like, it's my love. Then there is Alice Walker's The Color Purple, which is a beautiful illustration of Black queer women's writing. And then lastly, but not least, another contemporary, Charlene A. Carruthers' book, Unapologetic, A Black Queer and Feminist Mandate for Radical Movements. She was one of the founders, if I'm not mistaken, of BYP 100. She's currently working on her PhD in African American Studies at Northwestern and is just almost cursed again, Bernie, but I caught it. Just an amazing human being. um, so some readings to help you think through how you continue your learning. And last but not least, I want to thank you all again for making some time to share and be in community with me today. If you have questions, want to continue the conversation, my email is tmayo@clgs.org. If you like additional resources, more than happy to provide that to you. Be on the lookout. This will also be on our YouTube channel probably in about 48 hours. So feel free to share the replay with others and definitely follow us on social media to always be in communication with all of our upcoming offerings. And just want to say thank you all